All right. Today we're gonna just go over a question someone asked me was how would you pose a model that was already ripped from another program? So this model was ripped from Dawn of War 2. He's one of the special Chaos Lords, and like when you get him, he's gonna be one solid object. And there's all kinds of ways you can rig that and pose that in 3D, but usually you only do like a whole bunch of rigging and bone structures and stuff like that if you're going to animate something, throw it into a game engine. Uh, the person asked me this question. It was posed for Tabletop Simulator, so it's just going to be a simple pose, and then you're just going to throw it in. He's never going to move again. He's completely static. Um, so let's go over the way that I would approach it. Um, a lot of people in the community use Blender as a free tool. That's great. Not everyone can afford Max. You can get it other ways, but I don't like Blender, and you see why maybe. Um, so this is just like a fresh OBJ import that I brought in. He's got a bunch of sections to him. So I'm not going to go over like all the intricacies of how to use Max, but hopefully I'll describe the things I'm doing well enough that you can get over the hurdles of just basic UI in a 3D program. Um, So if you like grab a model like that, it'll have like editable mesh. Um, First thing I do is grab everything, and if you right click, you convert them all to editable polys. It just makes it easier to grab things once you're in here. You'll see that later. So if you click a poly and you right click and you go up to element, um, now you can click different parts of that model rather than it grabbing everything at once like it was before. Max breaks things up into elements as well as polygons, so you can like switch and you can grab individuals, or you can go back to element and it will grab the larger chunks. Each element is basically defined by if all the vertices are merged. So that's why it grabbed like the top of his chest piece here as its own object, and it didn't grab this with it. Um, that's not really gonna matter. But let's say you did want that to be one solid piece for whatever reason. Um, if you went into like vertices, and obviously now there's a whole bunch of them, um, you could grab them. You could perform what's called a weld. It's gonna initially just weld everything really hard like this, but to lower the tolerance, usually like 0, 0, 1 is a really good tolerance. It's going to show the before and after. If you don't see a change on the screen, but you do see a change in the before and after, that's honestly a good way to judge it because that means that there's a whole bunch of vertices sitting on top of each other that you just welded together, and now that object is going to just be one solid object. So I just did that to show. So let's see if I grab an element now. Yeah. So not only did it make this one element, it also grabbed his legs and stuff, which shows that there's a lot of pieces of this model that have a lot of overlapping pieces. So I'm just gonna undo that real quick. A better way to do that would have been to grab these two pieces, or maybe actually even these three pieces here. I know that this whole chest piece here is probably one giant piece. So I'm gonna just do this different way. So in Max you can do a control drag, so you can grab a whole bunch of stuff, and then you could also alt drag, so you could deselect stuff. Sometimes that's faster. See, I've grabbed like the whole thing there a lot quicker than like individually picking up those teeth. So now that I have this, if you hold down control and over here under your, it's called like the modifier list, but these are like all your tools while you're inside of a polygon object. So this will switch for you between vertex, edge, border, and element mode. Same thing as when we were in here and you were switching. You can alternatively just like click in here. Um, but the neat thing that you can do is if I go back here, back to the element. Oh, okay, I guess you can't switch while having an active selection. So just re-grab it. Let's get rid of those for now. Same thing's grabbed. I'm toggling between these two modes by hitting F3. That's F2, F4, there's a bunch of things that happen with the function keys in Max. They're all accessible up here under default shading and standard and stuff like that. You go into like edge mode and polygon mode and all that kind of fun stuff. Same thing in like every 3D program, honestly. So anyway, let's get back to grab these elements. Don't particularly like edge face mode. So now we get all of that again. Oops. If you hold down Control and then click Vertex, it will switch to Vertex mode, but it will only select the things that were selected in element mode. You can do this with everything. You can go into polygon mode, and then they're all selected as polygons. You can go into Vertex mode, back to edge. But what's important now is it's only going to weld the things that we have selected. Everything that's highlighted in red will be welded. So if you go up here to weld, it remembered the tolerance there, but I'm just going to type it in anyways. So you see it's going to weld, you know, a few hundred. Click OK. Now if I grab this, it didn't actually weld everything there. So those pieces might actually be too far from each other. And you can either, you can play with that tolerance a bit. It's like maybe you want 0.1. Yes. Element. So see, it welded most of this, but it didn't weld these like these teeth in. That's probably because those teeth aren't actually sitting on edges like everything else was. But if you wanted to weld things and break it up like that differently, you can do that. For this model though, you'll probably just have to do what I'm about to do here next, which is, let's say you have to separate you have to separate everything on the model that would break on a joint. So I mean, he's a space marine, right? So it's really easy to decide where he breaks. And anything like robotic or mechanical, it's really easy to do the method I'm about to show. I'm not going to show a method really for doing organics. I'm just going to show the method for what is often referred to as like rigid rigging or rigid body rigging. So I'm just going to start separating him at his joints here. So there's his it's from the knee down. Actually, no, we want to just grab the foot here. If you hit detach, you can give it a name like left foot. Probably not going to name everything in here because it's really not going to matter. It matters more for like rigging in a production environment or something like that. So leg. I'm just going to assume that wherever this part of the leg goes, his this little piece here is going to go with it. Detach that. So right away you have, if you have to leave. Sorry. So when you're inside of an object in Max like this, so like we were inside of this object, grabbing elements. If you want to get out of this element object, you can't just click another thing. In Max, you're like inside of that object, and therefore you can't select other things. So if you want to get out of that, you can either right-click and go back to top level, which means now you can do whatever you want, grab another object, or while you're inside of an object, and there's all these little options. Oh, never mind. There is no top when you're inside of something. So I guess when you're in there, you're in there. Oh, you can double-click it, I guess. Click out, click in. I just use the right-click, top level. It's easier. This is often referred to as a quad menu. If you ever have to look up how to customize your interface in Max, quad menus are mentioned a lot, and it's literally just right-clicking, and you can see what you do. So anyways, we broke the foot up, we broke the knee up, and on the top of the leg here. Now, if you go to rotate these, obviously they're garbage right now. Wherever you detach an object from, it will grab the pivot of its parent. So the parent of these objects at the time was the rest of this body. So you're going to want to bring the pivot back to where a knee would probably be, right? So in Max, if you go up here to these tab menus, there's one called Hierarchy. Excuse me. And you want to click, well, this is an open adjust pivot, affect pivot only. Really quickly, you can just use center to object because sometimes your pivot's like it's way off somewhere. So this at least puts it in the middle of your object, which is sometimes what you want, but we're not gonna want for this. Hit W, you go back into translate mode. I'm assuming that you'll know that like W takes you to translate, E takes you to rotate, R takes you to scale. But when you're affecting a pivot, you largely just want to translate it or you want to rotate it. So we're just going to roughly, put this where we think his knee is. If you hit L and max, it'll take you like to a side profile. I'm actually going to align this with the little like bolt-like joint that appears on the side of most Space Marine armor. So now it's going to rotate around that. So if you turn off effect pivot now, and you go back into E, which is your rotate menu, you see the knee is now going to rotate, where the knee joint probably should on a Space Marine. You notice here, actually, I missed the bottom part of his foot, and it's actually now combined with the knee. That was easy. You just go in, right-click, element, you gut it, detach it, click OK, go back out, grab the foot. So for the foot, we're just going to attach the bottom piece. There's literally a button here called attach. Click it, boom, there now one. Go back up to hierarchy, effect pivot only. You can center that pivot. There's the foot. And you might want, the pivot of the foot to be more over here, near the back. So you basically have to use like A, your own judgment, and B, obviously human physiology. Like that's where the ankle is on a person, so that's where you put it. If there's monsters or tentacles or whatever, you put them wherever that makes sense. If there's like bits like his cape and stuff that I'll show later, we might want to pose the cape differently, and that's going to be, I'll cover that more towards the end. So right now you have a foot, you got a knee, and then he's got this big skull piece here, so let's just quickly detach that. I grabbed it all at once there. It's good to go into this mode so you can see stuff. There's actually like some of these white faces here are probably the back faces of this object. You may or may not care about those. I'm just going to grab them anyways. So I detach it. It's all nice and clean. So, there's that skull piece. Yeah, the skull piece doesn't need its own pivot. It's not going to rotate or do anything fancy. But it can be nice to either detach it, or actually the smarter thing to probably do is to grab the leg, go into element, and actually attach it to the leg. Or the knee, sorry. So it's just going to follow the knee no matter what. So I've actually done a lot of this detaching on another model that's sitting over here. But I'm just going to show it on this. That way, I'm experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. So you want to, this is like an armature now, you could almost say. So if you want to move this, you want the foot to go with it. In Max, there's just a button up here called Select and Link. So if you click it, your icon will become a little like 2 squares of links. And if you click it, the little line now is appearing wherever the pivot for the foot is. And then you're just going to link it to another object. And this is known as parenting, or linking, I guess. But this foot will now become the child of this knee. So if you grab the knee and you move it, the foot follows. And then if you want, you can then rotate the foot. And then you could rotate the knee again. So it's very quick to just straight up pose a model like this, because you're like, oh, I want his knee off to the side. Maybe he's on a rocker or something. You put his foot down. It doesn't look very good, but you get the idea. Another thing to remember in Max is, so look at this rotate, and this may or may not always want to be the rotate you want, because like, for example, if I rotate the knee, right, and you want that knee to rotate on the same axis as it was when it was here, right? Because that's how the knee bends, up and down like that. But when this is all rigged up, actually I'll just do it now. Well, if this upper part of the leg here was rigged, so I'll just slap this together. We'll grab this, we'll link this. People can turn their legs. So if you turn your leg like that, we won't worry about anything that's going up here right now. But if you turn like that, you would want the knee to now rotate, aligned this way. But if you just do this by default, your knee's going to bend at a really weird angle, and like you really don't want that. Um, so by default, Max is using what's called uh, the world as a rotation reference, you could say. So Max has a bunch of different things for how things rotate, like where it references. Right now, actually, this is set to view. There is world, which is going to look really similar. But the one you really want to look at, and you don't really care about the rest of these, is local. So you notice when I did local, it immediately snapped in this direction. So if I undo this, let's go back. A good way to see how this changes is, so the knee right now is set to local, which is what it should be doing. But if I go back to world, it looks exactly the same. That's because the axis of the knee and the axis of the world are by default the same. This is fine, because, that's probably where the knee should be. But when we move the leg, and let's set this to local, you'll notice when I move it, the axis moves with it, and it stays there. And if I stay on local and I go to the knee is now still aligned as well. So now the knee bends in a normal way. Whereas before, you've been whirled and you would have gone this way. Well, it doesn't go with it, so now the next time you move this, it might be a bit weird. And then this one, oh, this is weird now too. Well, what if you want to bend it on this angle? Well, usually when you rotate stuff, you want to grab one of these axis handles, because that's the most accurate way to do it. You don't want to, you can grab in space here and like try to align this the way you want it, but it's kind of a hot mess. You don't want to do that. It's annoying. So there might be some weird angles that you need to pose some of these objects at. So let's say the foot, for example. There's another feature in Max that I'll show you right now, where if you right click an object, you may isolate it. So now you're just looking at that object. And let's say we wanted to align the foot really finicky. Technically the foot is not straight up and down like this. So if you go into rotate, well, the pivot is affected. You can move the axis of it like that, let's say. So now when the foot rotates and you're in local mode, it's more in an angle. It's more to where the foot is actually modeled on the model. Another quick way to switch between them is just to hold down Alt. If you right click, you immediately get the same menu that exists up here. It's just much faster to get to, so it's probably what I'm going to use for the rest of this. Okay, so I've been switching around. So T takes you to the top view in perspective, or without perspective, and P will take you back into perspective, and Z will like zoom in on any model part you have selected. So boom. You also notice you start zooming in, it's like, oh shit, the part of the model is disappearing. That's clipping. So what you're going to want to do is either A, when you use your model and just make it, you can just size it up, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. Or you can go into a menu up here in perspective. You can go to viewport clipping. If you do that, this wonky little bar appears. If you drag this bit down here, that's your near clipping. So now I can I can zoom in a bit further and it won't really care about it. And to end isolation mode, you can right click and you can end isolation, or let's go back to isolation. You can also do unhide all. You can also right click and hide selected. You can hide unselected. Max has a lot of really neat ways of just really quickly hiding things that you don't want to see, which was actually something that when I went back to use Maya, I was frustrated that it didn't have it. So when this came in, this model came in pretty small. These are like the grid squares, and I think a grid square right now for me is set to like every grid square is like 10 or 20 centimeters. So he's really tiny. So you want to scale him up so you don't run into clipping issues. So this is the model I started on earlier. So I already broke him up into most of his pieces. So he's got like, his knee is broken up. Oh, actually, I think I duplicated some of his model. Yeah, let's just reload him. No big deal. Chaos Lord. Alright, yeah, the other one's gone, but it doesn't matter. We just need this guy. So I didn't get very far on actually rigging this guy, but I did get far in separating most of his pieces. So let's separate like his head here. I'll do a few of these. I don't know if we'll do all of them. I just want to show the idea of how you could string together a lot of them. So like a good thing to do usually is like the legs and stuff like that, because those will cause the most issues actually when posing a model. It's gonna hide some of these. See, yeah, some of this torso isn't quite right. So I'll isolate that. We will open this up. Detach that. So I'm just going to weld all of these together. You'll notice that when I welded one of those, or when I attached one of these pieces, this whole side went black. And you'll notice actually when you pan around to the back, it's all black. I don't really worry about that too much. I find when you bring models in from other programs, like when you rip models from Dawn of War or any other game, in 3D there's a thing called normals, and they're like these tiny hairs that poke out of every single model. In fact, if I just put a modifier on here, I can quickly show what a normal is. It's kind of an abstract thing for people, unless you're into 3D. So basically, these these normals that are sticking out of here, there's like usually 3 normals per vertex, and they literally tell a camera when it's looking at a model, what should the vertex look like? Should it be really dark? Should it be really bright? You know, and right away here we can see that like some of these are blue and some of these are green, and what that means is some of them are not facing the camera properly. This just shows display length. This doesn't really mean anything, just more to show this. So that's why sometimes when you bring models in and they're like some of the areas look weird and black and dark, but you might bring them in a tabletop simulator and they look fine. All 3D programs read normals slightly differently, and sometimes you don't have to worry about them. But generally, it's better if in your program they look good. So, you know, these are black here like this. So I'm just going to weld everything real quick. It's also always better to weld things if you can, because as long as the model looks the same and you're not getting any problems with it, it lowers the polygon count when you export it to a game engine, which means that it's just going to make your game run smoother when it's in there. So the moment I merged those, the blackness went away. It's probably because it realized, you know, oh, all the normals in this model are facing a certain way, and I'm not. I'm going to match them. So there's the torso. We separated that arm. We were going to do the legs though here. So we get our torso. Get these legs. That. Yeah, same thing when I was doing this model. I forgot the feet. Let's go in there and detach those real quick. Let's just reattach them now. So just going to grab these feet, or that skull, these legs, and the middle bit here. Alright, well technically, you probably want this to be a joint as well. Like he's gonna, if you want to swivel him at all, he's gonna swivel right here. And I may have been a bad idea to weld all of this actually, because he's one element now, but you're probably gonna want to make him bend and move at this point. So I'm just gonna grab all the polygons, take all of this. I'm gonna use a feature here called shrink. So we'll shrink my selection, and it just so happened to shrink the selection like exactly where you wanted it to shrink, which is like where the chest piece breaks off, and there's like usually there's like wires and pipes and stuff like that. So if I detach that, it's pretty good. So what you want to do now is you probably want to just like align all the pivots. So right away you can grab everything actually, and you can go up to the hierarchy button here, effect pivot, center pivot. I like to center the pivots before I start. It just means everything will be a bit cleaner. So the feet, obviously these should be back further. If I go to a side view, and I actually grab both of the feet, effect pivot, I'm just going to move them both at once. Move them probably like there. You can always change these later. It's just a better idea to often align them in the beginning. So let's do these. So you notice that these are offset a little bit, which kind of sucks. So I'm going to do this one first, and then we're going with this one. And so if you hit L, you'll go into left view, but if you hit R, you won't go into right view. There's no hotkey for it. So if you click here, you go right view, and then you could align that right there. Or you could actually decide to align them on top of each other. It's really up to you. Maybe you want to make them match. I'm just going to make them align on here, because I don't know. Maybe this model is not perfectly symmetrical. It looks pretty symmetrical, though. But, I mean, who's going to notice that? Probably nobody. So, let's do the legs here next. You notice I'm just aligning on the side. That's because, like, these... they're not really going to matter when it comes to the side. Well, I guess they will, actually, if you want to rotate them a bit. So, pull that a bit to the middle. Pull that a bit to the middle. You can use the geometry to help you decide where it goes, or the texture. Like, right now, there's, like, a line that goes down the center of this. So you kind of know that's the center. And you could even use, like, them to help with your rotating your pivots. Let's get rid of this little skull thing. So right there, we're just aligning that. So now his leg, like that. Feet are flat. However, legs don't rotate from the hip like that. So you're going to want to take that, maybe pull it in. Again, if you were doing this for like a job or a production or something, you would probably get a lot more accurate results than what we're going for, but we're just trying to pose a model simply for Tabletop Simulator. So the torso here, probably good to leave it centered. I mean, it's going to be, if you want to wiggle there. And then the torso here is going to do the same thing. You might want to change it for when you lean forward and stuff. So we might bring that a bit more forward. Technically, you might want to align this like where your spinal column is or something. But not all of that always works. Like, you might actually want this further forward. So when he bends forward, the geometry doesn't immediately punch through. You're probably going to do more things though like this, like off to the side. You might actually lean him back a bit, but when you do that, you can always bring him down. Since we're not going to be rigging with bones, which means you actually have a lot of flexibility in what you're going to do, but bones are good for animating, and I'm not going to dispute that. But just for posing, this is a pretty quick and dirty way of doing it. So we got the body here. So let's just link stuff up. So quickly, you could just link the foot to the leg to the knee to the thigh, and the thigh to the torso bit, and then do the same thing over here. And then you want to link the torso to this. That way, if you want to move this, everything moves with it. They often refer to this as the root in 3D, the root of an object. That way, you can like bend the knee, move to the side. He's gonna move with it. Torso move back and forth like that. So right away, I mean, now you kind of have a makeshift armature. Like if you want to pose this guy, you could do something like that. The leg back like that. Maybe so like that. Torso's more like this. I'm not saying this looks good. I'm just saying, like, if you wanted to start posing a character like this, maybe he's got, let's say he's got like a base or something underneath of him. This is obviously way too big of a base, but you get the idea. So like I don't know. It depends. Not many bases in Tabletop Simulator have lots of detail, but I've done a few together. So like let's say you actually wanted him to be like standing on a rock or something, you know. So armatures are a little painful when it comes to posing legs and stuff like that, because like this probably doesn't look that great. It's better than his static pose though. But if I unhide everything, for example, now, um, that's not too bad looking. We obviously went ahead and didn't rig everything at once because I wasn't gonna show all of that, but time allots. So let's say you want to bring the sword into his hand. Well, you could that pivot. You could drag the pivot down to probably where where he would grab a sword. And you could wrestle this into position if you want, or before you fix the pivot on this hand, you can use this nifty tool up here called the Align tool. And if you click that, it'll immediately put it to the pivot of another object. And you could pick orientation here. You could match scale. Sadly, none of these matter for this, so it's just going to put it there. If the hand actually had a good pivot and was aligned, it might actually snap the sword more into the alignment. But you could just drag that sword down, rotate that sword, put it off to the side like that, drag it up. If you attach that to his hand, that means anywhere his hand moves, there goes your sword. Obviously, if we attach the hand to this, and then we attach this to his shoulder, attach his shoulder to the arm, suddenly you move the arm, you've got everything moving with it. If we actually went in here and did these pivots properly, move the pivot of this up here, it's more of a shoulder feel. This elbow joint isn't in a bad spot, but it's obviously not aligned. So you could throw that in like that. Same thing with the wrist. The wrist does not bend in the middle of the palm. You put it up there, like that. Maybe a bit more like this. So now let's say you might want to let's say bring his arm up. So now he's kind of brandishing his sword. Use it like that. So sometimes I render just to see what everything looks like, because sometimes in this view you can't. Oh, renders in the screen. Sometimes I render so you can see like all the model, because sometimes you go to the back and it's a little dark, and you just want to check to make sure what you're doing is working. I edited his texture to be a bit brighter because I might actually retexture him. So yeah, you can just start linking parts of the model up. Obviously now if I take the shoulder, for example, and I link it to the body, I can, when I move the body, there goes the rest of it there. But if I move the middle bit here, and let's say I don't want to rotate on axis, let's say I just want to rotate on world here, because sometimes you want that. Now now all of that goes. Link the head down, link the eye thing with the loincloth thingy there. Now most of the model is moving when you want to repose them. You might want to repose a shoulder pauldron because maybe the gap here is too much. You don't want a gap that big. And now when he's looking at you, you can't see that that opening. Maybe you want that opening, right? So that's how you would start roughly posing as an armature. Usually when it comes to posing, you should probably use some reference. You might end up with some weird looking poses otherwise. Some things to remember when you're posing is that you don't want anyone to ever look off balance unless that's the idea, unless he's running at you or something, because the center of mass over the middle is going to look weird. It even looks kind of weird now how he's standing, he's kind of awkwardly leaning a bit to one side. But I mean, we didn't spend much time on it. It's always good to have him looking in a certain direction, I find. Kind of adds a bit, like he's paying attention. Let's say, let's do some bonus stuff here. Let's say he was in a more dynamic pose and you wanted this cloth here to be somewhere else. There's actually some modifiers in Max that if you click up here, hit B, take your rate to bend, literally start dragging like this, and it's like, oh, you can have that cloth bend. It bends at both sides. There is something called an upper limit. So if we upper limit it, it goes all wonky immediately. But you have to start adjusting it. So obviously the upper limit for the top, let's put it like 100, so it doesn't really move at all. And the upper limit for the bottom, actually that might not be what we want. You can bend it, use the limiting effects. Some of these are a little weird to work with, and I'm not super familiar with them. It's just sometimes when they work really well. Like you might decide, I mean that obviously looks stupid. You could always rotate it like that, and you could lessen the bend there, and just reposition it so it kind of flows a bit better. Another way actually, which might be even better, I don't want to do all this because you want to move all this around. Another way that might be better and a lot more intuitive is if you just go into the modifier, hit F, it'll take you these things called FFDs. So let's say you pick this FFD. Actually, sorry, no, not that one. You want an FFD that you can adjust. So an FFD box allows you to set points, and the points are how many divisions are on this. So right away you could right click in here, go to control points, take these bottom points, you can rotate them all at once, and then you could move them to the side. And then you could do that with this as well. You could rotate these. You could kind of do what that bend was doing for you, but you could do more manually, and that's kind of better, honestly. And maybe when you're doing this, like you don't need all these points of depth here. So usually I start off by just dropping these all to 2. You get almost nothing there. And you go to 4. So the first one is your depth, so you don't, for this you don't really care about depth. You probably care a bit more about the up and down there, and then the height. And like you can add, tons of points, and then you can bend them more and more. But it's going to depend on your geometry. So there's not a whole lot of geometry here to work with. So if you really wanted it like super smooth, you would make this like high poly and bend it and stuff like that. It's honestly a waste of time for what we're doing here. So yeah, that's how you would pose an armature. I'm gonna go back actually, because obviously you want to build the entire armature out before you start posing him. Because now I have a bunch of pieces that were never posed properly, and it kind of sucks to go back and do that. And then I should also show you that you can animate in this really easily. So let's just do it with this leg, let's say. Let's say you want to either work out a pose, or you just want to have a bunch of poses. Maybe this is like an orc boy or something, and you want to see them in a bunch of different poses. You want to export a bunch of different poses, but you just want to, on the one model that you rigged essentially, you just want to see all of them. So let's just show how you can do that. So I'm just going to isolate this model. So in the bottom right here in Max, you can turn on auto key, and what that means is anytime you move anything, it's going to try to animate it. And so you want to start off by making a key at 0. So if you leave auto key on, or you can use set key, but you want to use auto key for this. This button here sets keys on everything. It's usually when I animate stuff or I post stuff, and it's all rigged up. You want to key everything at frame 0, and then you want to move it ahead. It doesn't really matter how far ahead you move it. You can move to 1, 2, 3, 4. I usually move to 10, just for increments. And now anytime I move anything, it's going to animate into that position. Let's say that. So basically, it's like we have our pose that we made at the very beginning, and we have our pose that we're gonna make into now. So if you grab that key and hit delete, it's gone. and you have to grab all the objects that you keyed when you did it. So like let's say this is a pose, and let's say you want to do another pose. So a better pose you might be to like try to bring him back into something a bit more natural. So like that. Let's move his torso back a bit, but we will bind some of these really quickly, just so it doesn't look too goofy. See, is everything bound now? Nope, his cape's not bound. I'm gonna turn auto key off for this. Okay. So let's turn auto key back on. Let's pick a pose like I don't know. Let's pick something that I did with the Space Wolves. Let's leg it more like that, down like that. So the problem is going to be is if you want to lean someone more further forward here. So we're gonna to lean him forward, we have to like lean his whole body, and then we would grab like these two leg pieces. We're gonna just do world rotation here, just because it's going to be easier. So he's going to be leaning a bit further forward. Maybe his head, sort of like that. It's often good to offset your model, and by that I mean like, so this arm will be back, let's say. It's kind of like he's, staring at you essentially. He's getting ready to wind up. Maybe you want to like put his hand out. Maybe not too out. This pauldron is obviously, it's now crashing into the model, but you can easily reposition that and fix that. I'm actually going to hide that so I can see this a lot easier, because that's probably more naturally where that arm should be. Well, I guess there's a joint right there that we can follow. Sometimes Terminator is really bulky. It can be kind of hard to tell, to be honest. Like his arm here is a little bit too far back. But sometimes you want to exaggerate those poses, and they're so small on the table, no one's really going to notice, but they will notice the exaggerated pose, which is going to look pretty sweet. These pauldrons are really, really big, eh? I want to like rotate the forearm here, which we didn't really pivot or affect the pivot well enough, so it's going to be all wonky. So notice if I try to adjust the pivot, it will try to move the child, so I could quickly detach the child, grab this pivot, make it more what I want. Make sure you're in local mode when you adjust the pivot, because if you're in world and you're adjusting it, you're adjusting it, but you can't really tell what it's doing. So let's do this. Turn that off. Realign the hand. So what I wanted to do with this is I wanted to turn the hand, which I could have easily just done, right? I could just turn the hand like that. But that's not entirely how that works, right? Like if you ever turn your wrist, it actually moves a lot of your forearm. So just to make that a bit more natural, I wanted to actually turn his forearm. So, not a. Oh yeah, he has a gun. Yeah, let's put that gun in his hand. I completely forgot about that. So we're gonna attach that to that. We're gonna grab that gun. I'm gonna turn off auto key because I don't want this to like key into position. So this may look a bit cooler now that he's actually gonna be like aiming a gun at someone instead of just kind of pointing his hand awkwardly in a direction. I see that for psychers a lot. Let's move this. Again, the pivot for this sucks, so it's not doing me any favors. you might want to attach the gun to the hand. So when I readjust his pose, it looks a bit better. He's kind of like a gorilla right now. He's kind of leaned over too much. But you get the idea. Oh, actually, sir, go back. If you make any changes while auto key is turned off, it will offset your entire model. So we go back here. This is pose. So what I was trying to do, I was trying to like move him back a bit because he was kind of a bit hunched. It's also a good idea to offset the hips a bit. So if you want to like move him like that, but then grab the upper body and twist it, it just usually looks more dynamic to have the body more twisted. So like opposing angles, like this way, that way. We have one arm back, one arm forward. So now if I render him, yeah, that might be cool. So this is going to show what happens if you turn auto key off and you're like, oh, accidentally I moved his torso like that. That means everything is now turned that way forever, kind of thing. So you want to be really careful that you don't accidentally do that. Whereas, you know, if you had auto key on and you turned him, oops, let's go back to 10 there. If you had auto key turned on and you turned him, you know, if you go back to 0, oh, he just goes back to his original pose. So watch out for that. It's pretty common to accidentally do that. I mean, I just did it, and I've done it for a while. Another thing to watch out for is if you hit spacebar, I have it disabled, but if you hit spacebar, this lock button will come on. And when that lock button comes on, you can't select anything in your scene. It can be pretty frustrating because it's not very obvious. Max made the biggest button on your keyboard, the most annoying button on your keyboard. Nobody uses that for anything like that, so it's kind of weird. So there you go. Like you'd have two poses for him if you wanted to. So I'm going to show one other technique real quick because I have time, and it makes posing a lot easier, but it is more difficult. It requires a bit more of an intimate knowledge of 3D, but I don't personally think it's that difficult. So I'm just going to reload the Lord because I don't know, I'm just going to get rid of those poses. I'll probably do something different later. So when working with legs and stuff like that, you know, it was kind of annoying that when we wanted to repose him, that we had to like move the entire body and then move an entire part of him backwards. And I'm going to show why you might want to rig him in a more meaningful way. This kind of sucks. I got to redo some of this, but you'll see how fast it can go because I'm just going to blaze through this. And I'm just going to roughly do this next bit. It is known as IK rigging, which is inverse kinematics. If you ever want to Google that and maybe look up a more in-depth tutorial. Because there's whole books written on rigging. There's tons and tons of stuff, and there's tons of ways to do it. There is no, like, so I guess there is a right way of doing, that's for sure. Rigging is one of the few things in 3D that you could say like, yeah, that works, or no, that doesn't work. Like, you know, you're either going to look at someone and it looks like they should move that way, or you're going to look at it and be like, nope, that looks ridiculous. They shouldn't move like that at all. So for what we're doing now, it's going to be more important to align everything right away. Because once we do what we're going to do, it's difficult to edit it later, which is why it could be very frustrating for someone who's new to have to sometimes redo entirely what you did because you didn't do it right the first time. Professional rigging is kind of really all about preparation and forethought. which you're only going to get with practice. Like, you're not going to know exactly how to do something until you've done it. I mean, you can read books and stuff on it for sure to really help that, but you know, rigging, I found rigging very enjoyable, um, but it's very much kind of like learn as you go feel. Every program rigs in a very similar manner, but there's just always different tool sets. Okay, so what most programs are probably going to tell you to do when you rig. My first example was just like the poor man's way to rig. This is how most programs will tell you to rig, and it's with bones. So in Max, if you go up here into the systems, this isn't set to standard. Well, it should be set to standard. Something else there. You can make bones. So what is bone? Well, a bone is this. Oops, make too many bones there. So if I move this, that moves with it. If I move this, that moves with it. So you see, just like how we parented all these objects to each other and they all started moving together, bones do that automatically. As you draw out a bone, that's a parent, that's a child, and then this is a child of that parent, and so on and so forth. And if I move this top one, they all go, and so on. And if I grab a few of them, a few can go at once. And what's neat is if I pick a bone structure that's more, let's say like a chain, right? You'll notice it goes up. If you use page up and page down, you'll go up and down these bones. And you could pose them like this, let's say, because it's curling in. But when you have a bunch of objects that are like essentially parented to one another like this, if you grab them and you make sure you're in local mode and you start to rotate them, they curl in. So let's think of that like, like a finger even, or a tail, or a cape. And when you animate these, right, like you animate that, and I move it, boom, there's like the sweeping motion. And I didn't have to tediously go in and like pose each individual bone. Or even if they weren't linked, I'd have to like, move them. So that's what bones are, which I think it's a little important to know what a bone is before we put them in the object that we're about to pose here. So it can be really helpful to draw bones from an orthographic view. You can do it from a front view, you can do it from a side view. Let's do it from a side view. So I'm going to start by picking what is called the root. So the root will be, the middle of the model, similar to how we had the root being this thing here. Well, you know what? We should probably do that torso thing we did before. Detach that, and then center the pivot on these two objects real quick. Go. So let's do the bones. Let's do them from the front, because then we'll just fix them later. So we'll do a bone right here, and we'll do a bone here, and we'll do a bone here, here. And then actually switch to a side view and do a bone here, and then there. And I'm going to delete this last bone, because it doesn't really matter to me. So you're going to notice they're all kind of wonky, especially the bone that I did in a different viewport. You can't just drag them, because it's going to rotate on the axis up there. You got to go into Effect Pivot, and bam, you could bring it over like that. And then you could rotate it into place properly. Orientations of bones is a lot more important than orientation of when we were linking stuff earlier. To make your life a lot easier, in this menu up here, if you click up here and you click bones, now you can only select bones. You won't select your geometry by accident. So you notice as I go down these bones that the green axis here, as I go down, it kind of matches up the whole way. And that can be pretty important when you're rigging. So just make sure that they're all kind of aligned. It may or may not matter for you. Sometimes you run into issues where if they're not all like that, it causes issues. Don't really go into it because it's kind of a 3D thing, but so if we just like roughly align these bones, the idea is that you want these bones to align with the natural joints of your object here. So if I go back into all mode and I go, okay, where's the pivot? Pivot's up there. You could grab your bone and just kind of finesse it up into that area. You could rotate it and stuff like that. We go to the side again. We've decided that the pivot for this is there, so you could take the bone and be like, okay, well, we're going to put that up there. Another interesting way to do this is when you have your bone selected and you're in edit pivot mode, if you go up to align and you just click an object, and it'll bring up this menu, and it's probably default. It's probably going to say current object pivot, target object pivot. What this means is, would you like to align the pivot of this object to the pivot of this other object? And so bones are essentially all pivots. So you're going to align the pivot of this bone to the pivot of this knee. And we're going to align orientation right here, maybe. No, you don't want to do that. You don't want to align orientation. So that's where the axes come into play. Is the orientation of this bone is different than the knee. Don't worry about it. If you want to learn into that stuff, I would look up some rigging and see what are the pros and cons of doing that and why you should do it. But right now, that moved that bone to be perfectly in sync with where this is, where the knee is. So we could do the same thing for this one. Okay, it kind of moved this other bone up here, but that's okay. Pivot on this one. It's kind of up to you if you want to do this. You don't have to do this. So similar in fashion how we rigged before, we're going to take the foot and link it to this first bone, and then we're going to take the knee and link it to this bone, and then the thigh, link it to that bone, and then this and link it to that bone. Be a little hard to select these sometimes. I'm also going to grab all of these bones here, and I'm going to do what's called a mirror. So if I just mirror these bones like so. Alright, you don't want to mirror that way. You can mirror with a modifier here on the right. Copy. World. Nope, you don't want to do that. If you do world and you copy the bones. Okay, so when you're doing your mirroring, it's really important whether you're in local mode, which will do this when you want to mirror, or if you're in world mode, because world will mirror over the world axis here, which is more like this, which is probably what you want. So we're going to copy it. So now you have a complete copy of that bone, which is nice. We are going to delete one of these bones because you don't need two of them. And then we're actually going to move this bone like that. Actually, I'm going to delete this bone. And we're going to replace a single bone, let's say like this. Doesn't really matter because I'm going to align it where I want it. So I'm going to grab this bone. I'm going to put that bone in the middle here. So let's do that. We can just align the pivot to that. Boom, bone's in the middle. I'm going to hide that piece real quick. So even though you've probably noticed that all of these bones kind of have these little structures that link them, it's for visual representation. So this is the outliner inside of Max. If I click this bone, it highlights it here, and if you do a drop down, it kind of shows these are all of its children. So if you click through all of these, it will, end up selecting those various pieces. So you hit H, brings it up. This is more just to show you what it looks like. It will show those hierarchies. So like let's say I take, we're going to call this bone the root, and this bone here. So if I link this bone under that bone, and this bone under that bone, and then we open up our hierarchy, open it up. You'll see that root now is like the top dog. He's the parent of all of these other joints. And so now when I grab these and I twirl them around, everything moves with them. And so let's quickly, we'll bind this other foot, bind this other leg. Grab all these, unhide, grab that other piece, isolate them again. Grab that torso and link it to that. And then we're just going to might as well make another bone. Actually, I'm probably just going to duplicate that bone. This is a detach button, so I'm unlinking it. So now it would have maybe been a parent of one of these, but I don't want it to be. And then I will make this a child of this bone. Because the idea is you want to be able to rotate this, and everything goes with it. But you're going to see why it's cool that we're doing this. Is you want to be able to pose these legs and stuff without having to worry too much about reposing the rest of the body when you want to do something. So let's move on to the next step. And the next step is what's called IK handles. So we'll go into bone mode here just so we don't select some geometry. If you click a bone and you go into animate and you go to IK solvers and you go to an IK limb solver, click it, you get a line, and you want to click like this is the top of the thigh, and if you click like the ankle here, that means that the knee will it'll interpolate what's going to happen here. So and that'll make sense in a second here. So it creates this little handle, but as you drag it, notice it bends the knee for you. So when you're posing your character now, if you're like, well, I want the foot to be over here, well, it's going to move that leg for you. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You move it up, move it around. It's kind of doing all that for you. And that's kind of rigging. You end up building these systems to make life a lot easier, so you're not just posing armatures all the time like Claymation. And so this is where it gets even more interesting. If I take the root now, and I'm like, okay, well, I want the root to do something. If I pull the root down, notice how this leg, it refuses to move down in the same manner. So that means now when you're reposing stuff, you want to like move to the side or something. His leg won't be. You don't have to repose that leg. Now, obviously, it's not working very well right now because it still moves, still crashes through things. It's not. See, there's like techniques to change this. So first off, let's do that. I'm going to grab these real quick and just hide them. You want to make, I believe you want to make another IK. From that point, and you want to drop it right there. So now when you move this, they move even less. I'll grab the model so it's better visualization. So notice now the foot doesn't even want to go through the floor now. So a reason for this is because the IK handles like to interpret things themselves between 2 points. So the 2 points that the second IK is interpreting now is between the knee and basically the toe, whereas the other one was up here and it was between the thigh and the foot. So these IK handles are not really children of this root joint, and because of that, they don't want to follow where it goes, which is why if we remove these, they don't want to do what this is doing, which is really nice when you want to pose stuff, obviously, because now let's go back. Now when you want to move them around, you can do stuff a lot faster. Oops, grab his foot there too. And go back to bone mode. Be a bit too hard. So now if you like rotate him like that, bring him down. He's got this foot that does. You can repose this foot too. More of a squatting position like that. Obviously, like, the knee is breaking open there. Um, you have limitations on like what you can do with whatever model you have. But like, let's say if you wanted to have him like bend the knee or something, you've got that going on. You could leave this knee rigid like that. You know, you could lean him forward like that. If you wanted to put him up on his toe more, you could do that. So your only problem here is like, okay, well, how do I control now what this leg does? Because it seems to kind of want to do whatever it wants whenever you're posing the rest of the body. You can grab the IK handles and move them, and it's going to look really weird like that. This IK handle here especially. So this is where it's getting a bit more intricate, where a lot of this is going to have to do with parenting. So like if I take this IK handle, and I'm going to say that its parent is this one now. Now when I move this leg, it comes up with it, which looked a lot better than before, because before when I moved it up, the foot was just going to stick to the ground, right? And you didn't really want that. But now, if you parent it, pulls up. So that's nice. Obviously, you can have a lot more freedom with that. Looks a lot more natural too. Like if I pulled the foot up like that, because he was standing on some kind of cool rock. Um, your only problem right now is that like you can't rotate these and really get anything meaningful from them. You can maybe kind of. So because the IK handle of the foot is the child of this IK handle, if I rotate it, it will try to rotate. So you could technically use that to rotate the foot. But it goes deeper, honestly. Like so if I grab these again, get rid of this junk for now. Let's actually quickly, I'm gonna rig the other foot because it's gonna be weird to not see them both doing it. All right, so now if you do this, look up and down, you're gonna want to reparent this to that. So now they should do like roughly the same thing. So you can already see that you're going to be able to do things that were a lot easier to do than when you were doing your armature. Like you could just easily move the whole body around. You could rotate the whole body around. And like you only have to do that by touching this one thing on the model. And to make this a bit easier to grab while we do this constantly, I will do what most riggers would do, which is you don't want to have to constantly grab this bone. You ideally don't want to grab bones all the time. So if you go up here into Max's menu, go into splines, you can make a really simple star. Let's just draw that on the ground. Grab the star. You could align that star with that align tool right to this bone here. If we go on hide, now he's got a star that's really easy to grab that's outside of his body. I'll just hide these so I can grab this bone. Similar to everything else, if I grab that bone and I parent it to that star, now I can grab the star and yank it down, and he goes with it. If I rotate the star, so you can see like the bones are now going to inherit the star. The IK handles inherit each other's stuff as well. Rigging becomes this whole system of what to grab, what to parent, what to make a child. And you can go as deep as you want with that. Generally, if you're posing to this degree, you end up making this is called a control usually. So like you might want to make a control for these IK handles because it's going to allow you to do things that you weren't able to do without them. So let's make a donut, as they call it, and we will. I'll just deform it a bit so it kind of looks like a foot. Match to that. So now, so when you have an IK handle like this and you rotate it, it can only do so much. It's kind of doing that. But not only is it easier to grab this way, but if you parent an IK handle to a control, you get a bit more freedom with what you can do with it. Be able to rotate things certain ways you couldn't rotate them before. Now you'll notice like it's not going to match 100%. Like there seems to be a bit of an offset. That's because IK handles just the nature of how they work, because they're always trying to interpolate between, you know, what these two bones are doing. And there's definitely better ways to do this. This is just like an overview. The only other thing to know about IK handles is, so let's say you got the knee, you bring it up like that, let's say, but you want to bring the knee out like this, right? And you're going to rotate it a bit like that. That way the foot is kind of aimed, the toes kind of aimed that way. But let's say you don't want this on an angle like this. You want it more up and down, right? You don't want the knee to be like that. You want it to be straighter for whatever reason. Even let's say it shouldn't be like that, but let's say we do want it like that. So you'd make another object like a star. You know, bring it up. We'll just rotate it towards us for simplicity's sake. If you hide this geometry, if you go into an IK handle and you go up into motion, this whole big menu of junk. All you really care about is this IK solver properties. Pick a target, pick that star as the target. You will now notice that if I hide the knee here, anywhere I move the star, it moves the knee. So these are often referred to as pole vectors. So when an IK handle is like, you know, moving something up, and it's like, okay, well, it's interpolating between, you know, the top of the leg and the ankle on where the knee should be. It doesn't always know correctly where it should be, but the pole vector will allow you to control where you think it should be. So, you know, if you bring the knee down, bring it back this way, maybe you rotate that back, and you're like, well, that looks kind of dumb. It's like, well, maybe his pole vector should be more like that. And it literally rotates the entire knee around. So it's something to be very aware of. And like, yeah, you could have it so when you pose the knee around, and it always points there. Same thing if you grab the star, which is our pole vector, essentially, and link it to the foot. Well, and everywhere you move the foot, that's going to move too. But then you still have the freedom to move this around. So, kind of covered way more than I was intending to cover. But if you want to do more advanced rigging when posing characters, it can be really helpful. I posed a bunch of characters when I did some of the Space Wolf stuff because it was just easier to copy and paste poses. Something to note too, like let's say this is a pose you want, and I showed the animation thing earlier, but let's say you just want to save off this pose for whatever reason. You could easily just grab all the geometry. I would make sure you just have geometry selected up here. It's the easiest way. And you could copy it. Oops. So you want to be in world view. If you're not, it will try to copy things in a direction that is its axis. So you hold down Shift and so go into world mode. You hold down Shift and Max when moving stuff, and release it. It will create a copy of it. But it will create a copy of it, however it is in that moment. So if you do it, with the knee up. Oops, yeah, we're still in geometry mode, so we can't select any of that. So you've got that going on now. So he's got his foot up. I don't know, some of the small things. Let's say you delete this leg. You're like, man, I really wish both of his legs were up like this. Again, we went over there's that mirror function. So you can mirror that. creates a copy of it. I think we want to go back to world though. Copy it. You can drag the offset. It looks dumb right now. Actually, it's not really working for probably what you want. You would probably just grab it, copy it, use a modifier up here called mirror. Max has a lot of modifiers with the same name, but they do function differently. So you can see that this one didn't apply that wonky offset that the other one had on it. Just demonstrate again here. Yeah, so that's the kind of mirror we were about to get, and that's garbage. So now he's got this one, and like that might be more what you wanted. Same thing with any other part of the body, you know, the arms, torso, stuff like that. Yeah, if there's anything else that people might want me to go over in this really not so short tutorial, leave a comment. This was originally for one user on the Discord who wanted to know, like, man, how would I pose these? And you know, most of his questions were Blender related, and not many people were able to help him. And I don't know much about Blender, but I knew like it's just so super easy to do it in Max. If you have Maya, it's just as easy to do it in Maya. So, anyways, happy wargaming.